Welcome to Bridge North Baptist Church. Where were you last week? We had a baptism. Oh, no, it's just I've changed clothes, that's all. It's a very exciting thing to have Easter and to celebrate what happened. And I want to just talk a little bit about that and about why that has had such an impact over the years. So I want to read two passages from the Bible to you, if I can. The first one is a few verses from Luke, from Dr. Luke, who was a doctor who wrote an account of what happened on that Easter day. And it says this: on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices that they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood before them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here. He's risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." And then they remembered his words. Now, while that was happening, there was a chap called Peter, and he was in hiding. He was hiding away in a room behind locked doors. And he'd run away at the point at which Jesus was arrested and taken to be crucified. He'd been with Jesus for a long time, but when he got challenged, he just denied it and ran off. But these women, they went, and one of the first people that they told was Peter, and he came running to see what had happened. Now, sometime later, Peter is meeting with a Roman centurion. Now, one of the reasons that Peter ran away was he was frightened of the authorities and he was frightened of the Romans. Remember, he lived in an occupied country. And the execution that he just witnessed was the way that Rome put down rebellion. So he was frightened. But this is him now, just a few weeks later, talking to a Roman centurion. And he says this about Jesus: "We are witnesses of everything he did in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. They killed him by hanging him on a cross, but God raised him from the dead on the third day and caused him to be seen. He's not seen by all people, but by witnesses whom God had chosen, by us who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. He commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is the one whom God appointed as judge of the living and the dead. All the prophets testify about him, that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name." Now, in a court of law, we talk about reliable evidence. Reliable evidence. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk today about. It's about what is reliable evidence. One of the things I found quite interesting, it was just before Christmas, not long before Christmas, and I met somebody on the street in Bridge North. They were talking to somebody I knew, and they happened to mention that I was the pastor of this church. And this person rolled their eyes and said, "Oh, religion's just for weak people who need emotional crutches," which is a commonly held view. And I just thought, well, what do you know? Where's your evidence for that? And I have come to the conclusion that quite often we end up believing things without really thinking about the evidence, or equally disbelieving things without actually seeing the evidence. But let's look at some of the evidence. I'm going to say to you, first of all, what's the purpose of humankind? Ignore all what people might call religion. Forget philosophy, forget all of that, and just say, what's the purpose of humankind? So, here we go. What's the purpose of animals that eat grass? Well, they eat grass in order to keep that down so that other plants can grow, and when that comes out the other end, it fertilizes the soil so plants can grow. We can see its function. And the predators that prey on them stop them getting so prolific that they wipe everything out. What are insects for? Well, mostly, apart from trying to sting me, they're for flying around and moving pollen so that plants proliferate and seeds are moved like the birds do and so on. We look at all the purpose. And then we say, what is the purpose of human beings? Where do they fit into this amazing ecology? And as far as I can see, the evidence suggests that human beings are here for two purposes. Number one, to make each other miserable, and number two, to destroy the planet. They don't fit in the system at all. Now, I know that lots of people out there do good things and do nice things. But if we look over the last several thousand years, on balance, we don't treat each other particularly well. And we certainly aren't doing the planet any favors. Now, I know what you're saying, well, that's not how it's supposed to be. And I agree with you. So I would say on the balance of evidence, something's gone badly wrong. Something's gone wrong. Looking at the evidence, something's gone wrong. And I think I want you to just keep that in mind. Was there reliable evidence? There was a survey showed that I think it was about 45% of people in Britain and over 60% of people under the age of 35 didn't believe that Jesus ever actually existed. But that Jesus existed is a historical fact, that he as a person moved around the earth. In fact, it might surprise you to know that there is considerably more evidence that Jesus walked on the earth than there is that Julius Caesar walked on the earth. And in fact, what's more than that, the evidence that Jesus walked on the earth is considerably more reliable than that Julius Caesar did. And yet we don't have much trouble believing that Julius Caesar was around. Personally, I never knew him, but apparently he knocked about in Rome and other associated places. But there's more evidence for Jesus. One of the other interesting things is that there's reliable evidence that Jesus rose from the dead, and yet it was in everybody's interest to disprove that he didn't. Even the person that I quoted, Peter. If Jesus was dead, he had a job, he could have gone back to fishing and got on with his life. And believe me, this was not somebody who was, a sort of romanticized poet. This was a working class fisherman living in an occupied country. His stakes were not great for believing this. But here's something that maybe people don't know. Even atheistic scholars believe the evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. They're not prepared necessarily to accept that he was God because they're atheists, but they still say that the evidence that Jesus rose from the dead is evidence they're prepared to accept. Doesn't that surprise you? We've been doing Alpha. You heard Sarah mention Alpha. Alpha courses are great fun, and we've been doing an Alpha course. And the person who runs Alpha courses and has done for many decades started his life as an atheistic barrister.